It's the final chapter of the college football playoff.
It comes down to this.
Miami's unmatched grit and tenacity through the postseason has led them home. The national title now within reach.
They are confident. They are battle-tested.
Undefeated Indiana, led by Chris Signetti and Heisman winner Fernando Mendoza, have the chance to take home their first title and claim college football immortality.
The most remarkable turnaround in the history of college football.
The College Football Playoff National Championship presented by AT&T. Monday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern on ESPN and the ESPN app.
Welcome to No Question About That. This is United Inc., our, well, I was going to say weekly, monthly, sometime financial podcast with Jamie, also known as Subprime Goals, or the Director's Inbox. You've got a new Substack out there, Jamie.
Yeah, trying something a little bit different, broadening the horizons beyond just United, trying to make, it digestible, I think, for all fans, but then also a little bit like I've been doing with United, putting a bit, I think, further insight pieces out there. And that's definitely a goal, looking at some forecasts of other clubs beyond United, because there's a lot of interesting stuff going on in the world of football beyond United. I think, we are a special case just in terms of how much is going on around the business, including the footballing side. And I was actually asked to speak on a panel recently regarding some of this stuff, and there's clearly a lot of things there which we'd like to get out a little bit more in terms of kind of explaining it, what might be going through an executive's mind, when they're making a decision to buy a player, sell a player, thinking about, the director of football's role and how they think about constructing a squad, constructing their infrastructure. What does that mean for whether a club is a good investment? So we'll be digging into kind of all of that stuff, as well as things like media rights. That's going to be a big focus for us. And we've got a piece coming out, I think, relatively soon. I'm sorry, I was just checking the date. So yeah, it should be interesting. And I think if you're interested, not just in United, but I think the broader football finance landscape, that should be one for you.
Very good. All right. Well, today's topic is the changes to the profit and sustainability rules. The Premier League has voted through the squad cost ratio with some detail to talk about. I mean, I think we all expected this. The votes for squad cost ratio, so moving in line with UEFA, was generally expected. The detail is interesting, though, because it impacts United, but broader football as well. And we can talk about the top to bottom anchoring, or lack of, and why that was rejected by a bunch of what I guess you'd call middle rank clubs. All right, let's go to the top line then. New PSR rules coming from next season. Squad cost ratio, which limits the spending as a proportion, spending on football related activities. So that's player wages, amortisation. So that's the split of transfer fees, and head coach minus net transfer fees received, and any profit from the women's and youth teams, which is another detail in there, and limits is a proportion to 85% across the Premier League, or UEFA is at 70%. I think we kind of expected those numbers. So what's your initial reaction to the changes to the rules?
I think it's a good thing for most clubs. I think first and foremost, just from a simplicity perspective, right? Trying to understand the difference between PSR and the Premier League versus UEFA's rules, which is already based on squad cost ratio, albeit at a slightly lower percentage. I think that will help a lot of clubs when you're just thinking about how do you manage the business, how do you manage your transfer spend. And it's something that we've had, Jim Ratcliffe talking about, something that UEFA themselves have talked about in terms of trying to get more countries aligned with what UEFA are doing. So I think from that perspective, good. Look, the thing about squad cost rule in terms of the downside of it is that it always has favoured the bigger clubs, the clubs that make more revenue. The flip side of that is if you do care about financial sustainability of football clubs, i.e. can they be self-sustaining, this is the type of measure that solidifies that. And look, they've attempted to address the competition imbalance by allowing teams to spend up to 85% as a minimum if you're not in Europe, and also going beyond that if you've got an ambitious owner, albeit you will not be able to kind of sit, spending more than 100% on your footballing costs for a prolonged period of time.
Yeah, or really any period of time, bar 1 year. So yes, I forgot to mention that at the top of the show. So 85% of your revenues allowed, but you're allowed over a period of time an additional 30%. It would be easy if it was just calculated over a fixed period, but what it basically is if you go over the 100%, you then get that deducted from your 85% ratio later, right? So there's a penalty to pay, which they call a levy. It's not a direct financial penalty, as in it's not a luxury tax per se, but it works a bit like La Liga's rules, where you then lose that ability to spend in later years. So you can spend up front, but you have to claw it back later, effectively.
Yes, and the Premier League put out a really good little explainer, but it's exactly that. If you go over 85%, whatever that percentage is over, you take that away from your kind of like maximum allowed spend the following year. So if you are going to overspend to try and compete, it kind of somewhat throttles just how lavish you can be in your spending, because, say 1 year you're at 115%, the maximum allowed. Next year you would have to be at 85%. So it would be quite a big bet where to go that far, because it would either mean that you would have to qualify for, say, Europe, or get some very significant player trading profits to even that up the next year and kind of sustain the wages where they are. Yeah.
Already Aston Villa, Nottingham Forest and Newcastle fans have been claiming conspiracy here, that this is somehow constraining them. I actually think it's fairly good for those teams. They still have to sit within the broader context of English football, which has lost billions of pounds over the last 5 years, say. And despite profit and sustainability rules being in place, everyone's stretched it as far as they possibly can. It's also useful, and agents' fees always were included in this, but it's also useful to break this out very specifically. The Premier League spent £400 million on agents last year. That just disappears from the game, right? So at least if you're recycling money between football clubs, whether it's through Europe or in the Premier League itself, that kind of keeps the economy afloat, if you want to think of it like that, as a closed loop system. Take agent fees out, it's just going outside of football. This is not being recycled back in. This is Jorge Mendes buying another luxury boat, basically. And so it's good for everyone to look at that. And it doesn't limit in any way the spending there, so I don't know whether it will change behavior, but we can look at that and go, hang on, that is also a problem. But overall, this should peg, to use a term that was used in our last pod, peg spending quite significantly. I mean, it's very hard for over a rolling period of time for Premier League clubs to start losing money now, unless they're investing in infrastructure, youth, the women's team, and so on.
Yeah, and look, I think the other thing about this is, like, if you take a broader view just in terms of, where is the money coming from for these clubs? Broadcast rights, particularly in the Premier League, are obviously a huge revenue driver. And for a number of years now, there has been some questions as to, is that growth slowing and has it plateaued completely? It's why, potentially looking at streaming solutions to kind of keep that train moving along. And by allowing higher spending thresholds versus UEFA, it keeps that kind of transfer fee wheel going, which, look, the reality is, not just for clubs in England, but more broadly, that is a legitimate revenue stream and a legitimate business model. And having these higher spending thresholds continues to keep the likes of the Brentfords, Bournemouths, Brightons of this world, not in business, but it gives them a validation of their business model.
It may explain why Bournemouth are so keen to sell players, because they would have one of the worst squad cost ratios in the Premier League, if not the worst. They have a tiny little ground, which they are trying to expand, and obviously having an ambitious private equity owner there. Although an ambitious private equity owner has now sold some of his shares in, what was it, Hibs or Hearts? I forget which one now. Hearts, I think. Yeah.
So, but I think the story there was that they had a misalignment, I think, just in terms of the future direction. And I think actually those Bill Foley, Black Knight Football, they got their money back, or they got their original money back. And that's going to be going towards another one of the clubs in their multi-club network, Lorient. So I think they will still do okay out of it.
Yeah. All right, let's align this to United then. So go for the ratio: wages plus amortisation plus agents' fees divided by revenue gives you your ratio. United's wages, this is from last year's account. So the total revenue was 666.5 million. Record revenues. We dug in on the last pod about what that actually meant. Wages, well, we have to take a bit of a calculation here. So the accounts have 313 and something of the total wages. We have to deduct from that all the coaches that aren't the head coach, all the other back office staff, everyone, including directors that aren't players. So take a guess, 80 to 85%, something like that would get you to players. Probably that's pretty normal. Would have wages in the 260 odd million. What was your number there?
Yeah, I think I was just a little bit above that overall. And then obviously, to finish off your sentence for you, the head coach as well goes into that figure. So look, I've got the total squad cost ratio for last season. So up to the end of 25 at like mid 60% sort of territory.
Yeah, sounds about right.
And that includes a provision going towards profit from player trading. I think, we can debate this. I think going forward, United are in a reasonably strong position as well. Obviously, call it 65% versus 70% if we qualified for Europe. For us, on a revenue base of 666 million, that's an additional 35 million of spending power. That's at least two pretty good quality players. Yeah.
So to finish calculation, it's from last year's accounts, amortisation was at 196. I think that will come down a little bit. Agents fees at 30 million. Let's guess, whatever. Let's just assume that's about the same. That would, as you say, put United in the mid-60s. Player trading profits. It's an interesting one, this. It's not done, everything else is done on a single year basis, but player trading is a rolling 3-year basis. I haven't seen an explanation of why they've done that, but just to smooth things out, because you might have 1 year with a really big sale and 1 year where you want to invest, I guess. And UEFA do it the same way. Then if you roll this forward, the Athletic did a piece in which they kind of positioned this as a projection, and they had United below 60% as the ratio. I can't get to those numbers. I don't think you can either. They didn't explain in the article how they got to those numbers, and it's not a projection for next season. But if we do project forward to next season, where we're assuming we get a fee for both Rashford and Højlund, there'll be a profit for Rashford. It'll be about net even for Højlund. And we take their amortisation, 0 for Rashford, about 5 million a year for Højlund, or more than that, 12 million a year for Højlund, and the wages off the books. There's a healthy profit there. And then the thing I'd really look at is Maguire and Casemiro. They will not stay at the club unless they take a significant reduction in wages. Both of them, Casemiro especially, his amortisation comes off the books. And it's really big. I mean, he costs the club about 30 million a year, basically, in wages and amortisation. That will be reduced massively next season, which gives quite a lot of headroom, I'd say, for spending.
Yeah, and look, we've talked about this in the past, and I've kind of made my views very clear on it. Capacity to spend really hasn't been the issue for United, and to this point, it won't be going forward. It's the ability to spend. from a cash level, but also the ability to spend well in terms of who you're picking up. The amortization costs of a Maguire and a Casemiro are, I'm just double checking my numbers, but it's somewhere in the region of around 20 million, if I remember correctly.
The world moves fast. Your workday, even faster. Pitching products, drafting reports, analyzing data. Microsoft 365 Copilot is your AI assistant for work. Built into Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and other Microsoft 365 apps you use. Helping you quickly write, analyze, create, and summarize. So you can cut through clutter and clear a path to your best work. Learn more at Microsoft.com/M365 Copilot.
As a contractor, I don't pay for materials I don't use. So why would I pay for stuff I don't need in my mobile plan? That's why my Biz plan from Verizon Business is so perfect. Now I can choose exactly what I want, and I only pay for what I need.
Right now, with my Biz plan, get our best price, as low as $25 a line. Visit Verizon.com/business to get started today. New lines only. Price per month with 5+ lines. Includes auto pay and paper-free billing and promotional discounts. Taxes, fees, economic adjustment charge. Applicable add-ons, prices, and terms apply. Guarantee applies to base monthly rate and stated discounts only. Add-on prices additional. Offers in March 31st, 2026.
Yeah, Maguire came down because they extended his contract, and that obviously splits the amortization over 2 years. And then if he was to re-sign, it would be 0 next season. And then Casemiro his wages are above 15 million a year, and his amortization would have been 12, if I'm right. Or was he on a 4 or a 5 year contract?
No, so it's a 4-year contract. So, and Maguire was on a 6-year contract. So we actually do still recognise amortization for him. And
this
I
year.
wouldn't, and I wouldn't be surprised if there was an extension. I'm expecting it to be done right at the last minute, because that's when you've got the smallest amounts of balance sheet value left.
Yes.
To kind of then smooth out in future years. So, Casemiro's amortization is around about 15 million. That's his book value left. He's got 1 year left. Maguire, I think, is a little bit less than that, but about the same. So I said 20 million before, let's call it 25. In terms of wages, both of them together are probably about 30, 35. So, look, those are going to be big savings that drop off. I do expect the club, depending on whether they get rid of them or not, I do expect the club to kind of reinvest that. Everything that we have seen has been, we're going to continue to reinvest in the squad in order to make sure that the quality of the overall squad and its cohesion in terms of playing style fits the bill. So, look, the squad cost ratio could come down quite a lot, but equally, I would expect them to kind of sit just below that 70% and not be an issue.
No, I think that's right. And obviously it would be very dependent to the summer spending on the where United finish this season. Who knows? Pick a number between 4th and 15th and you could make an argument to me and I'd believe it. So depending on which week we're in, obviously we're recording this just post Everton, which was truly one of the worst performances under Amorim, and it's a very, very low bar. That's got everyone feeling a bit freaked out, I think.
Imagine if you were there in the cold.
Yeah.
It was not fun.
I certainly can imagine that. Yep. Yep. Yeah. All right. So United in a reasonably healthy position. Pick your number. It's in the 60s, I imagine. And it gives United capacity to spend next season, because if we are in Europe, revenues obviously increase. If we are not in Europe, we are not constrained by the UEFA squad cost ratio at all and can go and spend pretty big, although you'll be looking at future years, of course, and trying to plan for that. The rest of our Premier League rivals, then, let's have a think about some of them, because some of this is interesting. I wonder whether the director of football at Liverpool is looking at the £275 million he spent on Florian Wirtz and Alexander Isak and thinking that is a good value for money at the moment.
Yeah, look, I think Liverpool's an interesting one. And, if their season continues the way it is, they're potentially going to be in a very tricky situation, because all of a sudden they'll be in a scenario where the footballing world knows that they want to rebuild, and continuation of moving on Van Dijk, Salah, etc. but actually the book value of the players that they've got left is falling a lot quicker than their amortisation value, which is important. We haven't touched upon the SSR part of this, but when we think about, the market value of players, that's also going to be increasingly important. And spending to the extent that Liverpool did potentially becomes even more risky, because actually if you can't move them on, whilst you are the biggest fish in town and you can afford to spend that much on players, if you're buying players that are in their mid-20s and it's probably their last big contract, the risk from that deal has become a whole lot greater.
Absolutely. And when we relate that back to United and Ineos and their rule, you get 2 years and you to prove yourself and your value and you move on. It's actually a very sensible rule in this scenario. You do take impairment on the book value. So we didn't mention that earlier. So if a player's book value falls below their amortisation rate, you have to calculate that in. Clubs do this anyway, but it's usually in special circumstances. It's not like as a standard course of action, really, because it hits your ability to spend in the market.
Yeah, and it typically tends to happen as and when a player is sold. So the quote unquote paper loss is realised. Yeah. If you look at a club like Wolves, the last 3-4 years of their accounts, they've been consistently booking about 3 to 5 million worth of impairments. Chelsea are going to have a big one coming up potentially with Mykhailo Mudryk. Just because he's under a drugs ban, so won't be able to play. But yeah, I think it's gonna. If there is going to be kind of a equal and opposite force in terms of people can spend more and keep the transfer wheels turning, the equal and opposite force on that will be okay. We do actually have to really have a sensible way of evaluating the market value of a player, because So just to finish that off, it's an area of the rules which are, as it stands, because we don't have all the information, really open to potential skullduggery.
Yeah, I think there's some creative accountants and lawyers, sports lawyers, will be rubbing their hands with glee at some of this one. Yeah, I don't like the way there isn't really a formula here, and so there's going to be some challenges, I imagine. What is a player's value? Right? It's not like going and buying a pint of milk. I mean, I guess you could say, yes, it's like a pint of milk, but there's different quality of milk and there's multiple supermarkets and maybe you're really desperate, but the supermarket doesn't charge you more than me. Although, by the way, I have more than 50 patents in this area. So just on dynamic pricing and really awful skullduggery of that nature. But this is what happens in football player trading. Right? United pay a big premium on a player because they are desperate, for example. We all know this scenario. There's no calculation you could put on the books that says that player was absolutely that value. And in fact, there have been court cases in Italy around some of the really ridiculous deals that Juve did, where their argument was, I think realistically, who are you, the court, to say what the value of a player is to us, Juventus?
Yeah, and it's like, if someone is willing to pay a price, that is their value. And I think that's the area that's potentially up for most scrutiny here. If a club is getting close on SSR, we don't yet know really how strict the Premier League is going to be on in terms of breaking that rule, because it's all about how much available cash or available funds do you have to fund the business. But if you are a team that was in need of selling a player, say an Aston Villa, in order to kind of meet that, could there be a scenario where multiple clubs put in a bid at a rate that was above the balance sheet, but all of those bids were rejected? How do is then the bid value actually what is used as market value, or is it what the club says because no, we value them higher?
Yeah, well, we saw a scenario under the old rules where, let's just say, Forest, Aston Villa and Everton and Newcastle did some very interesting player trading, and it all seemed to go between them. Reserve goalkeepers for 25 million and that kind of thing, which didn't work out well for Newcastle, nor did selling Elliot Anderson to Forest. one would say. So, yeah, be careful of what you wish for in some of those, that skullduggery. We didn't break down some of the terminology here because I think we'll all have to get used to green thresholds and red thresholds. But the green threshold is your 85%, your red threshold is your 115%. Those are the boundaries you look at very carefully. The red threshold moves depending on your scenario, and the green threshold does not. And then there's obviously the UEFA limit below that. So some interesting calculations that we're all going to get to do annually now. This will be fun and games, won't it?
Yeah, and we should also say that the time period that is being measured is different, just to add in a little bit of extra complexity so no one can really work it out. The Premier League squad cost rule calculation is done in accordance with most teams' accounts, so the season. UEFA, obviously, it's slightly different, and they do it on a calendar year basis. So the timing of when deals are done and how deals are structured, again, in the case of Aston Villa with Harvey Elliott, where, the obligation to buy, if they did ever buy him, would only ever actually really be triggered kind of in the new calendar year. Things like that make a massive difference to the calculation.
Yeah, they really do. And in fact, it's an annual projection forward, isn't it? So at the beginning of the season in the Premier League, you'll project forward what you think your revenues are likely to be. And most clubs will be able to predict this pretty well to within a variance of a few million. Yeah. A few million or so. But so you take your last year's accounts and you go, okay, where are we? So with United, for example, 666 million, but a large part of that was based on a very full fixture calendar and a long run in the Europa League. We don't have that anymore. So we take all of that off the books, and you can make a forward guidance based on what you think your new sponsorship deals are, how many games you think you're going to have, your TV broadcast rights. Much of that is fixed for the season. The variance on the number of games is not, although it is with United. We don't have that many. And so you'll have to do a little bit of calculation on that. And so I guess when you come to the end of your accounting year, you do have a little bit of leeway in that first month of the transfer window to do some deals. And we've seen that before. Let's talk about penalties.
Yeah.
Because they are written into the rules, and the penalties are financial and sporting. So financial, we've already talked a little bit about where your moving red threshold is broken. You take a penalty for the next year. So equal to the amount you broke it by. So if you go 10% over your threshold, you will take a 10% penalty, the levy. For the following year, I think that's perfectly fair and reasonable and easy to understand. The sporting sanctions are a little bit different. You have to break that. How many years in a row? It's quite a few years in a row, isn't it, before you'll get a sporting sanction?
Yeah, I think it's if you go over the 115% threshold, you then get a minimum 6-point deduction.
Right, it's just a 115 threshold, right? Yeah, fair enough. Yeah,
minimum 6-point threshold, and then I think for every £6.5 million you're above that 115%, it's another point added. Mm-hmm. So, to what we were talking about before, you would have to go on an unworldly spending spree outside of your budget, and then really fail hard to breach of that, that sort of magnitude. And like the bigger clubs, I just don't see how you could spend quick enough to be able to fail.
Yeah, United would have to spend, well, what do we calculate? 450-ish as the annual cost of amortisation plus wages plus head coach. We'd have to go and spend
nearly double.
Yeah, nearly double. Yeah, over 700 million in a window. I mean, Chelsea gave it a good go one year. But no Premier League club is close to the 115. Bournemouth might be in the worst scenario because they just don't bring in any revenue at all from their ground, basically, because it's about the same size as Leeds Sports Village or something like that.
I'm fairly sure all of our stands are bigger than...
Yeah.
Maybe 3. Maybe not all of them, but yeah.
Yeah, maybe not the South Stand, but it must be close to that. Yeah. All right, so real teeth in the penalties if you are really wild. Some gaming of the system likely, I think. The other thing we haven't talked about is the Premier League have now voted out the ability to sell assets to yourself. So Chelsea got a one-time benefit there. Amazing how they broke all these things. Broke is the wrong term, but found all these loopholes that are closed afterwards. Well done, Premier League. So we can close the book on any idea of Sir Jim buying Old Trafford or the women's team himself and then pumping the money back into the club. It's never going to happen anyway, but would now not be allowed under these rules. So Chelsea did manage to get selling the hotel and the women's team to themselves like a £250 million bonus there, free money to spend that no one else got. Well done, Chelsea.
And Villa will get a bit of a benefit from selling their women's team.
Yeah, I suppose this could happen before June. So Jim, if you're listening and you want to do it, I know you won't, but yeah. All right. What else happened here? Let's talk about, I guess we talk about the implications. I think we've gone through all the rules now.
Yeah.
I mean, the implications for United, I think, are a healthy transfer window with a little bit of variance on top. So what was our last year's spend was 200 million-ish, depending on how you calculate all the add-ons. We will get the Højlund transfer done, assuming Napoli don't completely melt down, which there is a chance of that.
There is a chance.
There is a chance of that. Conte is, I don't know, he's got the concepts of a meltdown in place at the moment, if you're watching Napoli closely. Barcelona really depends on their financial situation. On the sporting front, I think they'd be happy to trigger that deal now. £26 million looks like a bargain for the numbers Rashford is putting up this season. Even if he was a squad player, he'd look like a very good deal. And he's not. He's now a significant player. So let's assume they make that deal. That would give United net on Højlund and a £25 million bonus on net transfer fees for Rashford. So 200 million plus that net, plus all the savings we've got, leaves a really healthy summer ahead, probably for United. Plus, you calculate in if we make European football. Well, at least make Europa League. Maybe the Conference League is actually probably a loss or close to zero benefit.
I had that dream again. My small business needs to hire, but I don't use LinkedIn, and I hire wrong. So our orders get all backed up. We're drowning in paperwork, then actually drowning, careless fighting off sharks with a stapler, and pirates are pillaging the office copier, and then I wake up.
Don't let hiring nightmares ruin your dreams. LinkedIn Jobs' new AI assistant goes beyond the resume, using unique insights to deliver a smarter shortlist. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/quality. Start hiring today with LinkedIn.
Good morning, Crust. It's a great day to be a bread brother.
Ugh, mornings are not my jam. Or jelly.
Oh, come on. Stop loafing around.
I just woke up feeling hollow inside.
Psst, just grab one of the new Morning Uncrustables sandwiches, like Bright-Eyed Berry or Up and Apple, filled with 12 grams of protein and tons of deliciousness. Crust, what are you eating?
It's just granola, not even yogurt.
No crust, no fuss. Uncrust your mornings.
I think Europa League would probably be, depends on exactly how contracts are constructed in terms of the bonuses that you get.
Yeah.
But I think Europa League is probably break even to slightly positive on the books. Conference League will be net negative because you just wouldn't, the prize money is just not anywhere near significant enough.
Yeah.
And, would you be selling out Old Trafford at the current ticket prices? Absolutely not. So
for a game against the Hungarian third best team, probably not. No,
the ability to spend will be there. I think cash will be of a decreasing concern, but there will still be a bit of they're not. I don't think they're going to go for a Hail Mary. And look, I do think it will really depend on the senior players in the squad that we've touched upon that they decide to keep. I think the club are going to continue to try and go down this route, which is we're not going to overspend for players, but the capacity to spend is there. And if they need to go a little bit higher than necessary because they're convinced about a player working, I think they will. We've already seen that with Brian Mbeumo, which has turned out, well, so far, touch wood, it's turned out to be a sensible decision. But, now that the business side of things, so to speak, has been kitchen sinked, there is more of there's not only a capacity, there's more of an ability to spend as well. And if sales crystallize, which I think they will. We've also still got Malacia leaving, or potentially leaving, Onana. Any funds that we get for those players are all going to be kind of like, reinvested and top-ups for the transfer budget.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's all fair. What I can't see in the current squad, beyond what we already know, is a profit on trading. I mean, let's assume Uate is sold. Will we make his amortisation over 2 years would leave, less than 30 million left on his book value? Could we make that back? Yeah, probably. Would we make a significant profit? Probably not. Same with Onana. So they won't be net transfer profits, but you can reinvest the money that is brought in for sure. I don't see another player in the squad that is obvious that you'd get a big deal for. Bruno is the one you'd look at. Obviously, he's fully amortized on his deal and on big wages, but you would have to replace the output. And he's still, despite playing pretty crap against Everton, at the top of nearly every important metric. So you would really have to know that the deal you're doing is going to be a net improvement in the team. And that is a harder one to evaluate. Not a financial question necessarily, but they go hand in hand, don't they? Sporting and finances.
Totally. And I think, if they decided to, it wouldn't just be them, but if the trigger was pulled on Bruno, it's still a big risk. I mean, yesterday, you touched on it. Yesterday was frustrating. And I don't know how much this has got picked up on, but he was getting in the way of a lot of things yesterday, where it reminded me a lot of the Europa League final, where, he's kind of standing where De Ligt needed to be, and De Ligt was giving him a 5-yard pass to basically play a pass that De Ligt could have done anyway. And the irony was the 2 times where Bruno didn't do that, De Ligt played a pass which we created a chance from. So, I think there is an important decision is going to need to be made around Bruno, and probably a difficult one. And look, they've got to have some faith, right?
In whom? Is the question, right? Wilcox, Vivell, and Barada on the deal structure side, or Amorim on the football side. It's hard to have faith in any of those things right now. Yeah, I mean, actually, the way of thinking about Bruno, which I think sometimes we don't as fans think about, is that he was replaced in the team by Matheus Cunha, who, as great as he's been and as much as we like him, has put up very few numbers so far. So not numbers to justify the deal, even if we like his performances. That may come. It's a few months in, and so on, and so on, and so on. That's not really a critique of him. But I think it's fair. We can be kind of sad statos here and look at both the data side of the footballing piece and the financial side of the footballing piece, and they should match up, right? You should be getting elite numbers from elite spending. And if you're not, you're doing something wrong. And they've done that piece wrong for a decade. Totally.
And but, to kind of quote the Moneyballism, if that's even a word.
It is now.
Can you recreate Bruno in the aggregate, but also add something different to your team? So
sure.
If it's let's say an Elliot Anderson, given that that's where all the reporting seems to be, between Elliot Anderson, Cunha and Mbeumo, do you recreate Bruno in the aggregate and actually have players that are more suited to what you want to do? Hard to define, but I imagine is what's going through
everybody's minds. Yeah.
Everybody's mind.
And the transition from Bruno has to come at some point, right? It's just at what point do you want to do it, and does that make sense for that particular window? And the aggregate thing, yes, very true. You can still only play 11 players, and that is the challenge, of course. United will end up doing quite a few deals this summer, and presumably midfield is the big focus, and wing back is the one after that. Assuming everyone's happy with Sané Lomans as the goalkeeper, I think generally we are, and a reserve goalkeeper comes in, or maybe 2 to replace Bayendier, who can't be happy being replaced by a rookie, and Onana, who will be certainly sold somewhere. Very good. All right.
And we now have a new head of senior scouting as well,
yes,
which I think just before we went on air, got announced. Kyle McCauley, who's come in from West Ham, like former West Ham, Chelsea, and Brighton. So some reasonable pedigree there. Some may question just how much, given stints at Chelsea and West Ham. But he was around Brighton during the Graham Potter years, and I think also was in the team that scouted the likes of Caicedo. So he's got that. He's got that on his CV at least.
All right, so Paraguayan third division players, look out for some of those being linked with United. Very good. All right, so I think the headline of this is that it's a pretty sensible set of rule changes. Look for a little bit of gaming of the system. I think this is a new one, isn't it? Spot the loophole that you can find. United are in a pretty good position relative to where we are in terms of the business right now. I mean, we've certainly been overtaken by some other clubs around Europe, and that is based on sporting performance, which we have to get right. And it's very unclear week to week whether we are getting it right or not. Can't say I feel very confident at the moment. Jamie, Subbrain Goals on all the socials and on Substack and the new director's inbox and newsletter as well. Very good stuff if anyone wants to understand it. Everyone listening, you can find us on patreon.com/NQATpod for the extra show. Also on Apple Podcast subscriptions. Thanks a lot, Jamie.
Thanks a lot, Ed. Until next time.
We interrupt this program to bring you an important Wayfair message. Wayfair's got style tips for every home. This is Styles McKenzie helping you make those rooms sing. Today's style tip. When it comes to making a statement, treat bold patterns like neutrals. Go wild, like an untamed animal print area rug under a rustic farmhouse table from Wayfair.com. Arr, fierce. This has been your Wayfair style tip to keep those interiors superior.
Wayfair, every style, every home.